Breaking tonight, a federal judge temporarily blocking President Trump's freeze on federal aid. That move coming just minutes before the order that sparked widespread chaos today was set to take effect. States reporting major issues accessing Medicaid, the potential fallout for education, hurricane recovery efforts, and other vital programs. Also tonight, ICE raids ramp up. Agents arresting dozens in New York City, the latest metro area to experience a major crackdown. And what we're learning about where the next raid is set to take place. Deadly tuberculosis outbreak, the startling number of TB cases on the rise in the Kansas City area, the concern for other states tonight. The violence breaking out in the West Bank in an enclave of Palestinian-Americans. Homes set on fire as clashes with Israeli civilians intensify. The disturbing case out of South Carolina. A Nigerian man extradited for alleged extortion after a teen died by suicide. That man accused of threatening to leak explicit photos if he did not receive money. And return to Auschwitz. We join a Holocaust survivor returning to the death camp for the very first time. Her chilling message and concern for the future. Plus, the new updates to Google Maps following President Trump's executive order. Top Story starts right now. Good evening. I'm Ellison Barber in for Tom Llamas. We come on the air tonight with breaking news. A federal judge challenging President Trump's order to freeze federal aid spending. That temporary block puts a week-long pause on the plan until a hearing next Monday. But the move already creating confusion and concern for organizations, nonprofits, and states who rely on the trillions of dollars in funding. This freeze, the focus inside the White House press briefing room today, where the new White House press secretary held her first briefing. Caroline Leavitt taking questions for about an hour, touching on a host of issues from artificial intelligence to defending the administration's immigration crackdown.
Can you just tell us the numbers? How many have a criminal record versus those who are just in the country illegally?
All of them, because they illegally broke our nation's laws, and therefore they are criminals as far as this administration goes.
And another big announcement during that briefing, the press room will be open up to independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators. Moving forward, they will all be able to apply for a coveted seat in that room, gaining inside access to the White House. But tonight, the big question remains, what will happen to this federal funding pause and who will be impacted? NBC senior White House correspondent Garrett Haig starts off our coverage.
Tonight, as part of his promise to reduce government spending, President Trump is making more than 2 million federal workers an offer. Quit now and accept a severance package. NBC News first reporting federal employees received the offer by email late this afternoon. The White House expects 5 to 10% of the federal workforce to accept it, which could lead to $100 billion in annual savings. But tonight, in a blow to the administration, a federal judge has temporarily blocked the president's attempt at another government shakeup, after the Office of Management and Budget overnight ordered a temporary pause on grant, loan, or federal financial assistance programs that might run counter to President Trump's executive orders.
It means no more funding for illegal DEI programs. It means no more funding for transgenderism and wokeness across our federal bureaucracy and agencies. President Trump is looking out for you by issuing this pause because he is being good steward of your taxpayer dollars.
Democrats immediately assailed the president's action.
Law enforcement, rural hospitals, aid to the elderly, food for people in need. This decision is lawless, dangerous, destructive, cruel.
While several state Democratic attorneys general sued to block the move.
When Congress dedicates funding for a program, the president cannot pull that funding on a whim.
But Republicans defending the freeze.
Let's get a handle on all this spending and figure out if it's going where it's supposed to go.
Tonight, the White House saying individual federal assistance would not be paused or reviewed under its plan.
Social Security benefits, Medicare benefits, food stamps, welfare benefits, assistance that is going directly to individuals will not be impacted by this pause.
But all of it sparked confusion about who would be impacted. The White House says Head Start, the early childhood education program for low-income families, would not be affected. But Connecticut Democratic Senator Chris Murphy posting, quote, Head Start reimbursement system is shut down in his state. What was your reaction when you heard about this order overnight?
Yeah, it was a shock to ask.
While in Florida, Talithia Edwards' 4-year-old son Raymond is one of the more than 800,000 children served by the program. She told me the uncertainty is nerve-wracking.
You look for other options, but there aren't many options when you think about affordability in child care.
And Garrett Haake joins us now from the North Lawn of the White House. Garrett, I mean, you noted in your report, Connecticut, as well as other states, they're saying these vital programs were actually impacted by this order. Has the White House responded to those claims? And in terms of programs being prioritized here, do we know which programs they are prioritizing?
No, Ellison, the White House has not responded to those claims, although we understand some of these systems are back up, nor has the White House given us the sort of comprehensive list that we were told in the briefing would be coming of programs likely to be affected and likely to be exempted. I think this is part of the challenge here. The orders are broad and they leave a lot of room for interpretation. And I think that's what got so many people who depend on federal assistance, either personally or through organizations that they're a part of or that serve them, quite nervous today. With the federal judge deciding to pause this order until at least Monday when another hearing can be held, there's a little bit more time for people to catch their breath. And I think even for the administration to figure out exactly how targeted they really intend for this to be.
And Garrett, in terms of this deferred resignation letter that was sent to federal employees, as you noted, it looks a lot like an email Twitter sent to its employees under Elon Musk's leadership. Do we know if he was involved in this decision, this buyout offer, or crafting the letter?
Yeah, Ellison, I've been fascinated by this because Elon Musk is so close to President Trump. This Doge organization that he is leading has such a broad remit across the federal government. But White House officials are always very reticent to say specifically what are his projects and what are not. The graphic you just showed, though, does give us a little bit of a clue here from a tweet that Elon Musk just posted of an art installation he likes of a fork in the road. That was pinned to his Twitter account, his X account earlier today. It's also the subject line of this email when it was sent out to federal employees today, and the subject line of a similar email Musk sent to Twitter employees after buying the company, in which they had to opt in if they wanted to stay employed at the company. So his fingerprints appear to be on this decision, even if nobody's officially confirming it.
All right, Garrett Haake at the White House. Thank you. For more on the impact of this federal funding pause, I want to bring in Rob Bonta, the Attorney General for the state of California, and Ellie Hollander, the CEO of Meals on Wheels America. That is a nonprofit organization providing meals to vulnerable seniors across the country. Thank you both so much for joining Top Story tonight. Attorney General Bonta, I want to start with you on this because you are co-leading with New York a lawsuit that has been filed to block this OMB directive that would freeze up to $3 trillion in federal funding. You are one of 23 state attorney generals who have filed this. In part, I understand your lawsuit is arguing that this decision violates the United States Constitution, specifically because of the Administrative Procedure Act. Explain to us what that means, because I think a lot of people know, okay, Congress is supposed to control the purse, but what exactly are you saying is unconstitutional here?
Well, thanks for having me. First, I'll say that this Office of Management and Budget order yesterday was dangerous and reckless. It was confusing and chaotic, and it was unconstitutional and unlawful. And we took Mr. Trump and his administration to court immediately within hours because it was unlawful and he was reaching far outside his existing jurisdiction. We brought two essential causes of action. One, that the Office of Management and Budget memo is unconstitutional in that it violates the separation of powers. What you just referenced, that Congress, not the executive branch, not the president, has the power of the purse, the power to spend, the power to appropriate, and decisions have been made. Budget bills have been signed into law, not vetoed, and decisions made about appropriations. The president, with one stroke of the pen, cannot stop that. He had an inauguration, not a coronation. He is a president, not a king. He has lots of authority, but it's not unlimited. And we also brought a separate cause of action under federal law, the Administrative Procedures Act, which sets forth the authority and the process for making certain decisions. And we separately and independent from the constitutional violation that we claim in the complaint also allege that he violated the Administrative Procedures Act. So 2 separate causes of action.
So what do you say to people who say, look, this is what the American people voted for? They wanted to see Donald Trump make dramatic changes, particularly as it relates to federal funding and office management, budgeting, things of that nature, and say, OK, this is what we wanted him to do. And furthermore, on the idea of he has power, but ultimately Congress has the power to deal with budgeting. If he were to say, OK, I didn't do this right the first way, let me go back to Congress and ask them to delegate this authority to OMB to say they could just pause all of this federal funding, could we see the Republican-controlled Congress just essentially say, OK, now OMB does have this authority?
So first I'll say Mr. Trump was definitely elected president. More people in the popular vote voted for someone besides him than for him. He doesn't have a broad sweeping mandate. He was elected, and he can do things within his existing jurisdiction. He can't do things that the Constitution prohibits. The presidential action will always yield to the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution is foundational and defining in terms of what presidents can do or not do. So there's no vote that has been taken to increase presidential authority, no constitutional amendment that's been passed. There's a way and a process to do things in our constitutional democracy with separation of powers, checks and balances, federal and state authority, and the way to make different appropriations decisions and spending decisions, power of the purse decisions, is to go through Congress. So if he wants to go through Congress and he can get the votes, that might be a way that he can make changes in the spending and appropriations arena, but not by one stroke of the pen by the Office of Management and Budget at the end of a day that goes into effect within hours, ending trillions of dollars of critical, essential funding to Americans.
All right, Attorney General Bonta, stay with us because I want to come back to you. But Ellie, let me bring you in here for a bit because, as we mentioned, your organization is responsible for delivering many, many meals to seniors all across the United States. A White House spokesperson saying that funding for Meals on Wheels should be fine, even though it doesn't fall under the umbrella of funding distributed directly to Americans. Does that reassure you? Have you been given any additional clarity as to what is going on here and what it means for seniors who rely on Meals on Wheels?
Ellison, you pointed it out very well. There is a lot of confusion because we are listed, the Older Americans Act, the Older Americans Act Nutrition Program, under which Meals on Wheels is funded through the federal government, is listed on the OMB spreadsheet that identifies those grant programs that are purportedly being frozen, although we understand that a judge has lifted that temporarily, and we're very pleased about that. I don't think people really understand where Meals on Wheels federal funding comes from. This may give us an opportunity to educate more, but we are on that list. And as you said, yeah, the funding goes through the states, which then ultimately gets down to a Meals on Wheels provider who then provides that service to a senior in need. But it's not, there's no direct cash to that person. It's not considered a direct federal assistance program like Social Security or Medicare would be. So we're concerned. It's confusing. And what we're concerned about is that nobody really seems to have the answer, and we don't know to whom to go to help clarify.
So what does that mean for you in a practical sense right now in terms of how your organization is able to operate without understanding what is happening? And in terms of a potential loss of funding to Meals on Wheels, break that down for people. What would that look like on a local level if that were to go into effect?
Well, the first thing I need to say is that Meals on Wheels providers are frontline. They are first responders. They're there for pandemic, for fires, for hurricanes. They will do everything in their power to leave no senior behind. But the fact of the matter is even before the OMB memo came out, we have been experiencing growing waiting lists across our country where 1 out of 3 programs have seniors on wait lists for Meals and Social Connection, on average 3 months and some as long as 2 years, because the funding has never kept pace with the need, the growth in the senior population, or inflation. So I get back to your original question, which is already our programs are struggling. Private philanthropy only contributes 1% of total funding to programs like Meals on Wheels. So it is a public-private partnership, and that 37% of the aggregate funding that comes through the Older Americans Act is really critically important for our programs to be able to seek additional funding to serve seniors in need. And as I said, there are already seniors who are not getting services and a lifeline who desperately need it.
And Attorney General Bonta, back to you before we go here. Talk to us about the practical impacts this has had and or could have on your state, a state that, as many people know, is still recovering from those devastating wildfires. I was on the ground for that. I mean, the scope of the destruction is massive. And for you, what is your message to this administration and this president?
The impacts of this memo on California are massive and devastating. We were in communications with the governor's office today. We estimated about $130 billion in federal funding put at risk just this year if this temporary pause was left in place for the remainder of the year. Services to our most vulnerable, to our seniors, to our children, to our sick, to our poor, health care for children, health care for the poor, housing for the poor, food assistance for children, preschool and college grants, FEMA disaster funding for the LA wildfires, multi-billions of dollars needed yesterday. People are desperate for the funding from the federal administration, and it has not come, and this puts it in jeopardy. So this is billions of dollars of critical, essential funding that has all been put at risk by one memo that was written in an act that was unconstitutional and clearly unlawful and was appropriately restrained today by a federal court.
All right. We will stay in touch with both of you. California Attorney General Rob Bonta, CEO of Meals on Wheels America, Ellie Hollander. Thank you both so much for your time and insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to continue our coverage on the Trump administration's migrant crackdown now. ICE operations are continuing in major cities across the country. This as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem joining ICE officers at immigration enforcement raids in New York City early this morning. NBC's senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has this report.
Tonight, New York City, at the center of President Trump's escalating crackdown on illegal immigration. Federal agents arresting an alleged ringleader for the notorious Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, who they say is wanted for kidnapping and assault. New Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem in body armor overseeing the roundup.
They're getting the dirtbags off these streets.
President Trump last night touting the ongoing arrests.
We are throwing them the hell out of our country. We have no apologies, and we're moving forward very fast.
Two sources familiar with the planning confirmed to NBC News ICE leadership has told agents to increase their arrest of undocumented immigrants to 1,200 to 1,500 per day nationwide. One source calling it a quota, adding agents may be penalized for not meeting it.
Mexico! Mexico!
Across the country, Trump's deportations are sparking both fierce backlash.
There's a real goal here to stoke fear into the American people.
And strong support.
I'm really happy it's happening. Very happy, actually.
After NBC News reported nearly half of undocumented immigrants arrested Sunday had no prior criminal record, besides being in the country illegally, NBC's Peter Alexander asking the White House.
So is violent offenders no longer the predicate for these people to be deported?
If you are an individual, a foreign national, who illegally enters the United States of America, you are, by definition, a criminal.
The cost of all this can be staggering. Two sources familiar with the process tell NBC News deporting one migrant runs around $10,500. Here in New York, city officials estimate it costs an average of $352 a night to house asylum seekers.
Are you scared? Can I handle?
Catherine Espancha from Venezuela says she and her daughters have stayed at this hotel, a migrant shelter, for 6 months. That could be a price tag to taxpayers of more than $63,000.
And Gabe joins us now with more. Gabe, I understand we are just getting some late details on where these migrants will be held before they're deported.
Yeah, that's right, Alison. Look, that's a big question in all of this mass deportation plan, potentially a shortage of detention beds. That's something that the Trump administration has been looking at. Well, just late today, we've learned that according to Northcom, Buckley Space Force Base in Aurora, Colorado, will be set aside as a staging area and a holding facility for some of these migrants before they are deported. Alison?
Gabe Gutierrez from outside of the Roosevelt Hotel. Thank you. For more on the ICE operations happening across the country and what could come next, let's bring in NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. Julia, we heard in Gabe's report there that 3 sources have told NBC News ICE leadership is telling agents to increase their arrest of undocumented immigrants, something from 1,200 to 1,500 per day, with one source at least calling it a quota. What else are we learning about plans to increase or expand ICE operations in cities across the U.S.?
Well, Ellison, as we understand it, they're going to continue this nationwide blitz to try to reach that goal, but they will primarily be focusing on 3 cities per week in what they call an all-hands-on-deck operation. That means they send not just ICE agents, but really all of the federal agencies that have joined ICE recently, including ATF, DEA, the FBI, and others. We've seen that already in Chicago. Gabe is there watching it play out on the ground in New York City. And as we understand from our reporting, from 3 sources familiar with the planning, Aurora, Colorado is next. If you can recall from the campaign, that was a place that Trump zeroed in on because he said, in his words, the city was infected by Venezuelans, even though local officials told NBC News the city was very safe.
Julia, another thing Gabe touched on in his reporting was the cost of deporting a person and also the cost of housing an asylum seeker, at least here in New York City. But walk us through those numbers again and talk to us about where those funds actually come from.
Well, it can be incredibly expensive, and it's something that a lot of cities asked the Biden administration for, more federal help in being able to shelter the migrants who came there. They got a big help in being able to give a lot of those people work authorization. Now the Trump administration wants to do away with those protections, and they want to, of course, expand deportations. The problem is the leading agency carrying out those deportations is ICE, which is already facing a $230 million shortfall. They're looking at ways they can make up for it, but it's difficult, Ellison, because, as you know, Trump in his inaugural address promised to deport millions and millions of migrants. Based on an estimate that NBC News obtained from the end of the Biden administration, it cost about $10,500 to deport one migrant, from arrest to detention all the way to the time they get on the plane. So if you're talking about trying to deport 1 million migrants, when it costs over $10,000 to deport just one, you could be looking at $1 billion, or $10 billion rather, that they would have to spend in just 1 year, which is over the operating budget of ICE.
Really interesting reporting. Julia Ainsley, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Now to the latest in President Trump's cabinet nominations. RFK Jr., Trump's pick to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, is facing a new round of criticism from his own cousin. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of the late President John F. Kennedy, coming out with a scathing letter to the U.S. Senate, calling her cousin a, quote, predator, and urging them not to confirm him. Here's some of the video she posted on social media.
He lacks any relevant government, financial, management, or medical experience. His views on vaccines are dangerous and willfully misinformed. These facts alone should be disqualifying. But he has personal qualities related to this job, which for me pose even greater concern. I've known Bobby my whole life. We grew up together. It's no surprise that he keeps birds of prey as pets, because Bobby himself is a predator.
More on this, I want to bring in NBC's chief Capitol Hill correspondent, Ryan Nobles. I mean, Ryan, talk to us about what else is in this letter from Caroline Kennedy. We're listening to her there in a video reading it, but I mean, a lot of some really serious and specific allegations here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a 6-minute video, Ellison, if that gives you any indication, the detail that she went into in trying to plead with Republican senators not to vote for RFK Jr.'s confirmation. She talks a lot about the policy positions that he holds that she doesn't agree with, from vaccines to a wide range of other issues that she has. But what she really gets into, and what is different from the narrative that we've heard about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., is his personal character, the personal character that she says that she personally witnessed growing up with him as a first cousin, the way that he responded after the death of his father when he was a young man, his struggles with alcohol abuse, the fact that he was able to get out of those struggles with alcohol abuse, but still, in her mind, has not been able to shake this narcissism that's been a part of his identity for his entire life. Now, it's important to keep in mind, while this is going to get a lot of attention, Caroline Kennedy is obviously very famous. She's the scion of this very famous family, perhaps the most famous surviving member of the Kennedy family. It doesn't necessarily mean that she's the type of person that can sway the ultimate deciders in this confirmation battle. And that will be a small group of Republican senators that will be forced to break with Donald Trump in order to sink Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s nomination. There's no reason to believe that they're going to be compelled by this note, this letter from Caroline Kennedy, even though it is very powerful, and it is her really putting herself out there.
What else, Ryan, should we be looking for in that hearing tomorrow? If there might not be a big focus on this letter, could other big issues come up that we should be prepared to listen for?
Well, what's interesting about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is that there isn't one specific policy proposal or character flaw that has people concerned. He has a wide range of controversial issues that he could be attached to that senators are probably going to press him on. Obviously, his vaccine skepticism is something that he's going to be pressed on. He'll also be pressed on his thoughts on Obamacare and the Affordable Health Care Act. Does he think that that should be defunded or changed in some demonstrable way? He's been very critical of weight loss drugs, which is something that a wide range of Americans have used. And while he's going to get a lot of tough questions from Democrats, he could get tough questions from Republicans on his abortion stance. He's been a pro-choice politician his entire career, and there are some conservatives, including the former Vice President Mike Pence, who've raised questions about that stance and have suggested that he should not be confirmed. So this will be a very fiery confirmation hearing that we're going to see here tomorrow.
A lot to watch. Ryan Nobles, thank you. Moving now to the weather and the severe storm system making its way across the country. Tonight, millions in the Northeast bracing for snow. Video showing drivers in Massachusetts hit by what's called a snow squall, leaving roads in near whiteout conditions within an instant. Meanwhile, heavy rain and winds are expected to batter the South. So let's get right to NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, walk us through what you're watching tonight.
Changes. It's been a cold and kind of snowy January. Now, as we head towards February, we have fast-moving storms and a big warm-up for a big portion of the country. So tonight, light snow is going to move through New York into areas of New England. We do have a couple of winter storm warnings. Utica's included in that, Watertown up to Bennington, Vermont. This is going to be a burst of snow tonight. It's going to last maybe like 4 to 6 hours, producing 2 to 4 inches. And then tomorrow, we're going to get snow squalls on the backside of it. Careful driving in Pennsylvania Turnpike, New York State Turnpike, through we are going to have snow squalls are almost like downpours in the summer, but instead they're snow, and we worry about visibility and pileups. And here's that weather pattern change. Flood watches are up for portions of Oklahoma and Arkansas. So areas that saw snow are now going to be in the 60s and 70s with a chance of thunderstorms. We could expect 4, maybe even 5 inches max rainfall in that area. And then a huge rain event is going to happen all the way through from Memphis to Bowling Green and Cincinnati. Unfortunately, with the warmer conditions comes the threat of some isolated severe storms. So we'll get some rumbles of thunder, Abilene up to Dallas, Fort Worth tomorrow night. But then as we head into Thursday, we actually could see areas with severe weather. So, Allison, last week it snowed in Louisiana, and now we can deal with isolated tornadoes and hail this week.
All right, Bill Cairns, thank you. Now to a troubling health alert to tell you about tonight. A deadly tuberculosis outbreak in Kansas, killing 2 people and infecting almost 150. The doctor treating those TB patients saying some are, quote, extremely ill. We get more from NBC's Ann Thompson.
A modern-day outbreak of an ancient disease, tuberculosis, a bacterial infection that affects the lungs, now in the Kansas City, Kansas area. State officials report 67 active cases in 2 counties and 79 latent cases where people are infected but not sick and can't spread it to others. There are 2 deaths associated with the outbreak, which health officials say started in January 2024. Though officials say the risk to the public remains very low, a state official told a Kansas Senate committee they are doing everything they can.
We have and still have mobilized staff and resources addressing an unprecedented tuberculosis outbreak in one of our counties.
Some of the patients are under the care of the University of Kansas Health System and Dr. Dana Hawkinson.
How sick are these people in this outbreak?
I mean, it ranges from very mild symptoms that may have been persistent for several weeks or months to extremely ill patients who've had symptoms for quite a while, but then seek medical care. And by that time, they are extremely ill.
How long does it take to clear?
We do have treatment for this disease, and typically the treatment lasts about 6 months.
TB is an airborne disease spread when someone coughs or sneezes. Symptoms include coughing, chest pains, fever, and fatigue.
So what can you do to protect yourself? Well, Dr. Hawkinson says there really isn't much. if you do get TB, he says you need to see a doctor, take the medicines, and then work with your public health officials so they can trace any of your contacts, notify them, test them, and then stop the spread. Ellison?
Ann Thompson, thank you. Still ahead tonight, the Nigerian man extradited after a teen died by suicide. That man accused in a sextortion scheme, posing as a woman and convincing the boy to send explicit images of himself. The charges he now faces. Plus, the death toll rising after the catastrophic Los Angeles wildfires. What we're learning about efforts to control those fires. And the update coming to Google Maps after President Trump requested to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico. We'll explain. We're back with the latest on a troubling case out of South Carolina. A Nigerian man extradited to the United States to face charges in connection to an alleged sextortion scheme that led to the death of a teen, the son of a state representative. NBC's Valerie Castro has the details.
For South Carolina State Representative Brandon Guffey, the memories of his son Gavin.
He learned to be the class clown and always working on bringing a smile to people's faces.
Are shaded with sadness for the dreams that will never be realized.
A big heart. He loved art. So many drawings and paintings. He was planning on going to college to become an art teacher.
The 17-year-old died by suicide in 2022 just after graduating from high school after federal prosecutors say he fell victim to a sextortion scheme over Instagram. Tonight, his family says they are finally getting some justice. Authorities extraditing Hassan Bun Hussein Abalor Lawal, a 24-year-old Nigerian man prosecutors say orchestrated the scheme, pretending to be a woman with usernames like Bella Janet 28 and Alice Connor 566. They say Lawal coerced Gavin into sending compromising photos, then threatened to leak the images and ruin the teen's reputation unless he sent money.
The defendant, while in Nigeria, hid behind a screen and terrorized Guffey. These alleged actions are reprehensible, and there is zero tolerance for predatory behavior going unchecked.
Even after Gavin's death, Guffey says the extortion continued and spread to other members of his family.
Once they found out that I was an elected official, to turn the heat up more and to try and extort that even further. It's just very disheartening.
In the wake of his son's death, Guffey mobilizing to get Gavin's law passed in South Carolina, which now makes sextortion a felony offense. The FBI saying sextortion of minors is a growing problem, reporting 13,000 incidents between October 2021 and March 2023, resulting in at least 20 suicides.
We have drawn a line in the sand in the battle of good and evil for our children. And I think that the message we said early on was that we would hunt somebody down to the ends of the earth if they hurt our kids. And this just proves it.
Lawal pleaded not guilty to charges of child exploitation and cyber stalking resulting in death, among several other charges. His attorney did not immediately respond to NBC News' request for comment. The extradition, a major step since the crime is often perpetrated from abroad. Guffey, emotional seeing the accused man brought back for trial.
This whole process
but eager to continue pushing for justice.
It's just the beginning of the next fight.
While protecting other families before it's too late.
My ultimate goal is that no other child will feel the way that Gavin did before he took his life, and that no other parent will have to feel the pain that we have had to feel. So regardless of where I go in life, that will be my mission until the end of my days.
And Valerie Castro joins us now in studio. I mean, what a difficult story to tell and to hear from that father. I mean, you can feel the pain and hear it in his voice. He mentioned there that this is the beginning of his next fight. What does he plan to continue doing here?
Well, part of his fight is to hold social media companies accountable. He says in this case, Instagram is where this all happened. So he did file a lawsuit against Meta saying they should be held accountable for his son's death. Meta has released a statement saying that they have put some safety guards in place. They say that they now blur nude images that are shared via direct messages. They let people know when they're chatting with someone outside of the country. They said they've also put an educational video out there so teenagers can look for the signs of sextortion cases.
Really important reporting and a reminder for everyone to be careful who they're interacting with out there. Valerie Castro, thank you. When we come back, violence breaking out in the West Bank, the village of Palestinian-Americans who say they are being targeted by Israeli settlers. What we're learning about the unrest there and their appeal to President Trump to take action. Back now with Top Stories news feed, starting with the deadly grocery store shooting in Indiana. Officials say 3 people, including the suspected shooter, were killed and 2 officers were wounded following a shooting at an Elkhart grocery store. Those officers were taken to a nearby hospital for treatment, but are expected to survive. No word on what led up to the shooting. The death toll in those deadly LA wildfires has now risen to at least 29. The Palisades fire, which is now 95% contained, has burned more than 24,000 acres and destroyed thousands of homes. Ultimately, officials say they are proceeding with their work there, and those final evacuation orders for residents of the area have now been lifted. And Google Maps will rename some major landmarks. Users will soon see Gulf of America in their maps following President Trump's executive order. Google says the change will be available to users everywhere except Mexico and will go into effect once the names are updated into the federal registry. They also plan to update Alaska's Mount Denali to Mount McKinley. Moving overseas now to the West Bank, where tonight we take a look at a village unique among its neighbors. About 80% of the people who live in this community are Palestinian-American, and a lot of them are also wealthy, but wealth that hasn't shielded them from recent violent attacks. NBC's Danielle Manjan has this story and that community's plea to President Trump.
There is nothing quite like it in the West Bank. Mansion after mansion fill the roads in the Palestinian village of Turmusaya.
This is where the fires started.
Where English is almost as common as Arabic.
Okay, this is the young man.
80% of people here are Palestinian American, including 15-year-old Mansour Hamdan. We met him on a day he was due for a medical checkup. This was him just a few days earlier, rushed to the hospital for an emergency surgery after trying to protect his village from Israeli settlers.
I was standing like here in this place, then they hit me with a stone in my head,
leaving him with a broken skull. Village officials say the attackers were from a nearby Israeli settlement considered illegal under international law. In response to the incident, the Israeli military told Israeli media they'd received reports of mutual stone throwing between Palestinians and Israeli civilians and dispersed the crowd.
I could assure you that right now we're being watched as we stand here.
Yasser Alkam splits his time as an attorney in California and as a spokesman defending his Palestinian community in the West Bank. There's no shortage of casualties here when it comes to settler violence. He says this farmhouse was set on fire hours before the ceasefire in Gaza came into effect. In the past, the settlers have come with guns, metal rods, and Molotov cocktails, terrifying residents and leaving a trail of destruction. This attack condemned by Israeli and U.S. officials.
What they believe in is that this is their land. We have no place in this land. That's the message they're trying to send.
In fact, many here believe it's also the message the new U.S. administration is sending.
I, Donald John Trump.
On his first day in office, President Trump lifted sanctions imposed by Joe Biden on extremist settlers. The president now suggesting Palestinians in Gaza be moved to neighboring Arab countries.
I'd like Egypt to take people, and I'd like Jordan to take people. You're talking about probably 1.5 million people, and we just clean out that whole thing.
It's an idea applauded by prominent far-right Israeli politicians Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who believe Israel has a biblical right to the entire West Bank.
It is the honor of my lifetime to earn...
During her confirmation hearing, the U.S. ambassador to the UN was asked if she agrees with both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir.
Is that your view today?
Yes.
And we're surrounded by settlements and outposts. Shiloh, Shfut Rachel.
Arik Asherman is a human rights activist and a rabbi. He's got something to say about the biblical claims over the West Bank being made by politicians.
It is simply unacceptable that in my name, in the name of my religion,
of my government that these people are prevented from their basic right to make a living off their land, with the ultimate goal of taking this land from them.
Okay, so we're looking at what...
Yasser Alkam has little hope that Israel will change its policies in the West Bank soon. So he's calling instead on the new U.S. president.
We want to send the message out to President Trump. We are helpless as American citizens residing in Palestine, and more specifically in the town of Turmusaya.
Now, many Palestinians we spoke to say they fear the settlers feel emboldened by the new Trump administration. Now, next Tuesday, the Israeli prime minister will be the first world leader to visit the White House since Trump returned to office. Ellison.
Danielle Hamamdan, excellent reporting. Thank you. Still ahead, crisis in the Congo, new video of violence erupting in Goma, and growing concerns the humanitarian situation could spiral out of control. We are back with the latest on the rebel conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the growing humanitarian crisis as rebels take control of the biggest city in the DRC's eastern region. New video shows a gun battle erupting on the now empty streets of Goma. Heavily armed Rwandan-backed insurrectionists known as M23 have seized that city, with reports of hospitals overwhelmed with both the dead and the wounded. As we've reported, residents in the North Kivu province becoming refugees by the thousands, fleeing the onslaught of fighting across the area. And in the capital city of Kinshasa, striking video from cell phones showing the gates of the French embassy on fire, with protesters throwing glass and other objects. The U.S. embassy and the UN buildings also targeted, as outraged protesters say other countries are complicit in Rwanda's support of the M23 rebellion. For more on the deteriorating situation in the DR Congo, I want to bring in Louis Mudge. He is the Central Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. Louis, thank you so much for joining Top Story this evening. I want to start with a report Human Rights Watch put out saying in part that this fighting is having a, quote, catastrophic consequences for the humanitarian situation in Goma and surrounding areas. Talk to me more about that. What are you hearing from the ground? And tonight, what are your biggest concerns for civilians in these communities?
Yeah, thanks for having me. For context, in a world that's really dealing with a lot of catastrophes at the same time, this is one of the most blood-soaked regions. We're talking about 4 million displaced people in eastern Congo at the moment. We're talking about 650,000 newly displaced since last week because of this fighting. And because this large city, the capital of the East, Goma, the third largest city in Congo, has now been taken by these rebels, we're seeing a lack of food. We're seeing electricity and water cut. We're seeing cell phone networks that have been cut. And we're seeing medical supplies, urgent medical supplies needed for the wounded that can't make their way to these newly displaced. We've also documented hospitals that have been shelled in the last 24 hours, which we're working to confirm. So it is truly catastrophic. These are enormous humanitarian needs that are needed in Goma and the surrounding areas.
So in the days ahead, what is it that Human Rights Watch in particular is focused on, or what is the most immediate concern on the ground? And is there room here for the international community to step in?
Sure, absolutely. There's room for the international community. First and foremost, there needs to be a degree of respect for international humanitarian law, and civilians absolutely need to be accorded protection. This is coming from both sides, both the militia, the M23, and the Rwandan supporters who have taken over Goma, but also from the Congolese side, from Congolese forces and their allies who are actually trying to engage as we speak in South Kivu and in some pockets of the city of Goma right now. Civilians need to be protected. Second, there needs to be pressure put on Rwanda immediately by its benefactors, including the United States, to cease this support for M23, to basically make sure this militia pulls back from this important strategic city. We've seen M23 take Goma before. We've seen this happen 12 years ago. They took it in 2012. And the U.S. was a key power in getting the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, to call those troops and to pull them back. This time around, we're in a very different international atmosphere, and it's not abundantly clear that the U.S. is going to take that leading role. But the fact is Rwanda still gets 30% of its GDP from international aid. So there's much space for the international community within which to negotiate with this Rwandan leader to get him to walk these troops back.
Why do you think leaders in the United States, despite presumably understanding and knowing some of the history of the Rwandan genocide in particular, and what has largely been seen for many years as the U.S. and other members of the international community's failure to act in a meaningful way early enough to make a difference, why do you think they seem to not be paying attention to this?
I think what you're seeing is play out is to many degrees a lot of Congo fatigue. This is a country that has been dealing with conflict for 30 years. The UN peacekeeping mission that is in the country right now, it's very easy to criticize it. I've criticized it. Human Rights Watch has criticized it. It's very easy to criticize. And it's been operating for more than 20 years at the cost of over $1 billion a year. And has peace been kept? No, it hasn't. So there's a lot of general fatigue, a lot of shoulder shrugging, and a lot of people saying, well, this is the Congo. These differences are just not tenable. We can't fix this. But those decisions, the price of those decisions are actually being paid out right now in human lives. And pressure can be put on the groups that support these militias. And there can be real decisions made in Washington, made in London, made in Paris and Brussels that will actually turn the screws to countries like Rwanda and get them to pull back. And so that really is our first and foremost call at HRW. We're really trying to get a full court press and attention on this issue.
And do you believe there is a path to peace if the international community is willing to get involved here?
Absolutely. There's absolutely a path to peace. But we need to learn from the mistakes. I was in Goma 12 years ago when the M23 rolled in. We need to learn from the mistakes that were made in these failed peace deals. And that has always been one key point, which is there's a lack of accountability for the group's commanders that commit serious human rights abuses and war crimes. And so any peace deal, there are peace deals as we speak that are operating out of Luanda, Angola, and there's another deal operating of Nairobi in Kenya. But any peace deal needs to first and foremost create a zone of peace, but secondly, needs to have some measure or mechanism for accountability to hold the perpetrators of serious crimes, of war crimes, accountable for the actions, to send a strong message that these types of militias don't pay, and these rebellions don't pay. Because right now, what these rebellions and these militias learn is it only takes a little bit of time. The international community will turn its head towards the next crisis, and they can go back to the abuses that they've been carrying out.
Louis Mudge, Central Africa Director at Human Rights Watch. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time and insights.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, returning to Auschwitz, a 94-year-old Holocaust survivor back at the former death camp where her mother and brothers were killed, her powerful story of survival and her hope that history never repeats itself. Stay with us. Finally tonight, we want to continue our coverage on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. American Holocaust survivor Ruth Cohen survived the death camp, but her mother, brother, and cousins were all killed. NBC's Jesse Kirsch met her as she returned to Auschwitz for the first time since her freedom.
Fog and snow cannot hide the horrors that unfolded here.
There are many things I blocked out completely.
The electrified fences caging people like animals, the starvation, the gas chambers.
What are you feeling right now?
That I can't go in, I don't want to go in, I don't want to see where my family and whole world was killed, my whole world.
This place is a reflection of humanity's worst. But at 94 years old, Ruth Cohen had to return.
What is pushing you to keep going?
The world, actually the world. Try and make it a better world, not as bad as it was. In whatever way, in whatever tiny way I can help.
She was ripped from her home, forced onto cattle cars with her family. She remembers arriving at Auschwitz.
First, my dad went that way with men. My mother went that way with my brother and my little cousins, and we went that way.
This is the last place 14-year-old Ruth saw her mother, her little brother, and 2 young cousins. They were likely immediately gassed.
It's awful, and it's terrible. I didn't know about the gas chambers. I didn't know about the crematorium. Now that I know about it, it hurts even more.
Ruth says she and her sister were sent to this blockhouse. They slept on a wooden plank.
6 of us slept this way, 6 of us slept that way. So there were 12 in one little area.
Was your sister here with you?
Yes.
Did you sleep right next to each other?
Yes.
Every night?
Yes.
Having her there with you, did that help?
I'm sure that it saved my life.
She wants to take a photo here.
You're smiling.
I'm here, and Hitler lost.
Ruth, her sister, and their father were eventually transferred to other concentration camps where they were liberated.
What did this place take away from you?
My life, until I got it back. Took my family, was only 1 year, 13 months, but it took a life away.
They built a new life in America.
It's constantly with me.
Ruth wants to make sure history does not repeat itself, sharing her story at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington.
Because the world seems to be getting worse rather than better. Nobody is remembering what happened, because I saw him there.
Holocaust survivors like Ruth have long warned the world about what can happen when you dehumanize any group of people. But to Ruth, today's world feels different.
I have to be a witness for the world that I went through the horrors. I survived. I made a life. I have children, wonderful children who are going to carry not my legacy, but my history.
She's sharing that history today with her daughter, Barbara, who found her grandmother and namesake in this book of names.
Just so real. I mean, my grandmother's part of me. I have her name.
What would you tell people to do to prevent something like this happening again?
I could say it in one word: love. Love would never permit something like this to happen.
Thank you for watching. Good night.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.